It's the 2022 World Cup. It's Costa Rica's players. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin, and today we are looking at Costa Rica's squad for the 2022 World Cup. Short version, please. Actually justify my clothing for this one. I didn't wear a soccer shirt. Instead, I tried to represent the colors of Costa Rica, the blue and the red. And if any Costa Rican is dissatisfied with that, you can easily resolve the problem by just sending me a shirt. I'll put my address on the pic. Okay, I'm not going to put my address on the picture, but you can get hold of me if that's what you want to do. Okay, let's look at some of the notes, and some of these emerge out of the podcast we did before, and the first part of the podcast where we had notes that emerged from the podcast. So let's go back. Let's actually start though with a different one, and a positive note. They had a tremendous end to the qualifying campaign, so it looked like the team was aging, which was one of the considerations we had, which I won't repeat. But in our podcast, we said, "Wow, it's an aging team. They don't seem to be doing much to rejuvenate the team." So ineffective in bringing youth in. We're a bit worried for Costa Rica, and it looked like we were right because they were constantly in fifth place during qualification. Didn't look like they were going to make it at all, and then suddenly at the end of qualification, they did great and made it to the Cup. They had to do it through a qualifying playoff with New Zealand, but they won that game too. And they did it by kind of going back to their veterans. They have a lot of players above 30 on the squad, and they tended to bring in young players and then abandon them after a short time. Tended to go back to veterans. The only problem is that's a bit of a worry going into the World Cup, because those veterans kind of made it seem like they wouldn't make it through qualifying, and then that's what they have to rely on during the Cup. So that's a pretty old squad going into the Cup. I'm kind of looking forward to the part where we look at age here, because my guess is they'll be a lot older than most teams, but there we have it. That's the story for Costa Rica. Actually, they cleared out a lot of players. Cleared out is not really the word, because what it mostly was kind of seemed to bring in a couple of players to try them out, but then didn't really try them out, kind of gave them a substitute appearance, or they appeared on the bench for a couple of games and then they were gone. And this describes a lot of young players that they brought in. So ultimately, they didn't rejuvenate the team much. There are a couple of young players who kind of made it through, but generally, as we saw, they tended to go back to veterans and cleared out a lot of the young players, who I think will probably come back after the World Cup, when some of the veterans will retire and they have to rebuild the team. Another concern is, not a really concern, but something to think about, is the variety of formations that they used. All sorts of formations, usually four at the4 and one up top, but sometimes a 4-3-3, sometimes a 5-4-1. In fact, 4-2-3-1 was probably their most commonly used formation. And however, it was actually their lesser used formations, the 5-4-1 and the 4-4-2, that they used the least, but those were the formations they used in their most successful games towards the end of World Cup qualifying, and also against New Zealand. So, the formation is really kind of up in the air. And, for some teams, that variety in formation seems to work, making them unpredictable. But my feeling for Costa Rica is that it and some of the player selections for certain positions just seem to be a bit of guesswork or a bit of trial and error, but a lot of players, a lot of formations being tried out, and not a lot of consistency there. So maybe a fan more intimate with Costa Rica can define it as a strength or a weakness more. I got to say, from my vantage point, it does seem to be a weakness. Okay, let's look at their club affiliations. By far the biggest name on the squad is Keylor Navas, who plays for Paris Saint-Germain, and he was with Real Madrid before that. Beyond that, we don't have a lot. We have Joel Campbell playing for Lyon in Mexico, and Jewison Bennett plays for Sunderland in England. A couple of players playing in the USA for FC Cincinnati and Real Salt Lake. And then one in Saudi Arabia. And I would say a little more than half of them play for the clubs in Costa Rica. Usually the biggest clubs like Saprissa, Alajuelense, and Municipal Grecia. So yeah, compared to some of the teams coming into the cup, not a lot of pedigree on the squad, with most of the players playing locally. Let's take a look at some of the statistics. I have a new one for you actually today, but we'll go over some of the old ones. So the first one we talk about is how many players are kind of on the plate for Costa Rica. So how many players have they kind of looked at since 2020? Actually, that should be 2021 there, but it's 61 for Costa Rica. That's actually a very high number. The average is 50, and only Mexico and USA are higher. It seems to be a bit of a CONCACAF thing, but not necessarily, because Canada's not that high, and Ghana is very high in Africa. So that means they've been kind of trying out a lot of players and going through a lot of players. So we saw with Costa Rica that they had brought quite a few young players in and dismissed them fairly quickly, sometimes with only an appearance on the bench or maybe an appearance as a substitute. So I've been saying they really haven't developed their youth for that reason. They kind of go back to their veterans. They've even kind of called back a couple of veterans over the last year, so players who have been absent from the squad for a while suddenly reappearing. So all of these play into that 61, a large number. However, in terms of definite, likely, and possible, the number is only 32, so that's kind of in range. The average is actually 33. So they do seem to be kind of whittling down the squad to a manageable size. And in fact, for players in the definite and likely category, it's 25. So that's pretty much the 26 that they'll bring to the cup. So if you kind of go through the players, and we will at the end, it looks like, you know, if the players in the definite and likely categories make it, then there'll only be room for one more. Of course, there's always a few surprises like injuries or players surprisingly not chosen or new players coming into form. But roughly they'll choose one of the players we've coded as possible from those 32. And so they'll be choosing from those 7 players, but really only have room for one there. I've talked about their age quite a bit in the podcast, so here we go. Here's the stat. Their average age is 27.5. The average is about 25 to 27, and specifically the average is 26.8. So actually not as high as I thought it would be, considering that they do have, let me see, 14 of those 32 players are over the age of 30. And Brian Ruiz is 37, Keylor Navas 35, and then 5 players who are 33 or higher, 6 players actually who are 33 or higher. That is balanced out a bit because they do have some youth in the squad. They have two teenagers, actually, Jewison Brennett and Brandon Aguilera. And then, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 players, 22 or younger. So that balances out a bit. So it wasn't as high as I thought. The average number of caps is 39.6, and that's very high. The average among the teams I've done so far, which is about 26 teams, is 29.2, so they're 39.6. So of course, with all of those older players comes experience, and that will hopefully be a benefit to them, although with age also comes age. So they're maybe a little bit slower. For example, Brian Ruiz now is just subbing into games, not really up for playing 90 minutes, for example, and is notably slower than he used to be. In terms of goals, the total is 123, and it is 4.1 average goals per player. But I'm beginning to feel more and more that that doesn't mean much. So actually 123 goals for the amount of caps they have is kind of low. So I've actually developed a new statistics, and that is the average number of goals per cap. So here presenting it in the first podcast, but I went back and calculated it for the other teams that we've done. And I turn it into a percentage here. So it is 10.4%, which in itself doesn't mean much. We have to compare it with other teams. So I'll just tell you the average is 13.5%, suggesting that Costa Rica is a pretty low scoring team, and we did know that. And in fact, there's only one team that's lower scoring than them, and that is Wales. The higher scoring teams, Germany has 17.5%, and Spain has 18%. And it looks like I forgot to calculate Qatar, which is also a high scoring team. But anyway, there we have it, a low scoring team. And if we dig a little more into those statistics per player, that bears out. Sorry about that. So the highest scoring player percentage-wise is Brian Ruiz. No, it's Joel Campbell, no surprise there. But he's only 21.2%, which means he scores about 1 in every 5 games. A good ratio for a forward is about 30%. And we've seen a lot higher than that. So 21% for their top scorer, quite low. Brian Ruiz has 29 caps in 144 games. That's 20%. And their next highest scorer, believe it or not, is central midfielder Celso Borges, who is at 17.5%. I'm surprised by how much he scores. Other players, some of the younger players do have good numbers. So Anthony Contreras, 25%, Jewison Bennett, 28%, but they have less than 10 games, so we don't really consider that in the stats. So Contreras has 2 in 8 games, and Jewison Bennett 2 in 7 games. So we'd need to see a few more games under their belt to consider them kind of high-scoring players. But perhaps it is promising going forward. All right, let's look at some of the issues on the squad. So they have a pretty solid defense. If they don't score a lot of goals, they also don't allow a lot of goals. And the standard defending pairing has been Calvo and Duarte. But we did see that they brought in some new players towards the end, actually defensive midfielders, and then suddenly switch back to the veterans at the end, as they often did, go back to their veterans, especially for that game against New Zealand. So they seem fated to do so in this cup, although they do have plenty of backups in central defense, but we expect Calvo and Duarte to be the starting pair of central defenders. On the left side, we have Brian Oviedo, but Matarrita came into the picture more and more. So the question is, which one will start? Again, I suspect they'll go with their veterans and choose Oviedo, and he actually was starting towards the end more than Matarrita, sorry. On the right side at the back, is it Keisha Fuller or Martinez? Ricardo Blanco was making a bid, but seems to be out of the picture now. And young Martinez seemed to be making a bid too. But in the end, they went with Fuller, again, going back to their veterans. However, we did see in that New Zealand game that at halftime, they subbed Martinez in for Fuller, suggesting that they weren't satisfied with Fuller. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in the upcoming friendlies and in the Cup itself. In the midfield, a bit of an issue is they rely on central midfielders for attack. So the attacking midfielder role is often not there. So they have central midfielders kind of playing defensively and offensively. I put down basically their low scoring and defensive style to that issue. They also have a high turnover, especially in the offense and on the wings. So in all positions really, but more in the attacking roles. And the left attack is a bit of a mess right now. That's the kind of left wing, left attacking midfielder, or in a 4-4-3, the left forward. They have had a lot of players coming in and out, but we did see towards the end that perhaps Jewison Benison is nailing down a spot, but he hasn't been in the position long enough to know. And in the attack, basically, is Joel Campbell going to be used as the right attacking midfielder that I think they want to use him as, or for lack of a goal-scoring centre forward, will they have to once again fall back to putting him in as the centre forward? So perhaps Contreras may be a solution to this, because he was the one forward they tried out who did score goals. So they'll be hoping that they can use Contreras as the centre forward and Campbell as the right forward. But again, Contreras wasn't really in the position long enough to prove himself. And that kind of goes along with the players they have tried out, Jonathan Moya and Juan Pablo Ortiz, not really working, because they put them as centre forward for a few games, but nothing came of it. They didn't score goals. However, as I said, Contreras did, so hopefully he'll be the solution for them. Okay, we have some new players for the squad, and perhaps I haven't been crediting them enough for bringing in youth. But they do seem to kind of fall back to the veterans, and I think they'll do that in the Cup. Nevertheless, we do have three new players who we consider definite to make the squad, three who we consider likely, and then three who are just at the possible level. So the defensive midfielders, Daniel Chacon and Orlando Gallo, both we consider to be definite to make the squad and adding a bit of youth to the squad. And in the forward line, I just mentioned him, Anthony Contreras. So that is a good step in the right direction, because I think a lot of their veterans will be retiring after the World Cup. Possible candidates, we have Carlos Martinez. So we talked about him in the right back position, possibly replacing Keisha Fuller, or Keisha Fuller could move elsewhere on the field, actually, because he does move around. On the left wing, or left attacking midfield, Jewison Bennett. He's very young now, just 18 years old, and hasn't really been in the position long enough to nail it down, but some new blood on the squad nevertheless. And Brandon Aguilera actually hasn't started that many games. Well, he started 6 games, sometimes as a central midfielder, and Sorry, I'm mistaken. Yeah, I thought he had fewer games, just 3 starts, but he's been on the bench a lot. And that's generally true of the possible candidates too. Ian Lawrence is a left back, but I think he has just 1 start in recent games. And Douglas Lopez, a defensive midfielder, hasn't actually earned a start, but has been on the bench in the last few games there. And finally, Rowan Wilson. It's possible that these players won't make it to the squad, though. They'll be close to the cut. Rowan Wilson himself just came in June 2022 and didn't start either of the games, but he was subbed in for one and on the bench for one, but not necessarily a player who looks like they're going to make it to the final squad. We do have a few players who are not young, but they are new to the squad in the sense that they haven't reached a tournament so far. So we have goalkeeper Aaron Cruz as a likely candidate. He's 31 years old, but this would be his first tournament if he makes it. And Gerson Torres, a left midfielder, but actually plays on the right. And he's 25 years old, but has not made it to a tournament so far. However, we consider both of those likely. And we have Ricardo Blanco, and he actually was more in the first half of World Cup qualifying as a right back. He looked like he was going to take over Fuller's position for a little while, but then he disappeared from the squad. So he's never been in a tournament and is new in the sense that he hasn't been in a tournament, but actually is 33 years old. So finally, Houston Salas got a couple of starts, and he's 26 years old. Again, hasn't been in a tournament. He got his first cap in 2021. But I wouldn't say these would be players who are going to rejuvenate the squad. But the 9 new players we talked about, we could see coming more into the squad, if not during the World Cup, then after. For injuries, we don't have much for Costa Rica, so they're kind of blessed that way. Only one injury's out, and that's Jose Guillermo Ortiz, the centre forward, and he was out with a cruciate ligament problem for which he underwent surgery. So he's been out since April 2022. I think he did the surgery over the summer, and he's expected back in late October. So we'll check on him in the update podcast, but it looks like he'll be back in time. For notable absences, we do have actually this veteran squad with some of the players already retired. So I won't go through their long bios, but just kind of mention them by name. We covered some of them in the player-by-player podcast, but we have Christian Gamboa. He held back he held down the right back position for many years, but the 2019 Gold Cup was his last tournament, although he did play as late as November 2020, but is off the squad. David Guzman actually played in the Gold Cup and was a starter there, but soon into World Cup qualifying after the Gold Cup, he disappeared from the squad, and he is 31 years old. There's a chance he'll make it back to the squad, but he hasn't been selected. Wasn't selected for their last 14 matches. Christian Bolaños, a right midfielder, again, very much a part of the squad. Not so much in the latter years, though. In the 2018 World Cup and 2019 Gold Cup, he was just a substitute. And he wasn't part of the 2021 Gold Cup. He made the preliminary squad there, but not the final squad. And October 2021 was his last game. And then we have some people who follow the team from World Cup to World Cup may recall some of the players from the 2018 World Cup squad. So these are basically players that retired after that. So Johnny Acosta, a central defender, he was a starter in the 2018 World Cup. And Patrick Pemberton was a long-time backup keeper, and he actually did start a couple of tournaments, the 2016 Copa Centro Americana, and also the 2017 Gold Cup. Of course, starting keeper Keylor Navas doesn't play in those tournaments. However, the 2018 World Cup, where he was a backup keeper, was his last tournament. Marco Urena, a forward who had 66 caps from 2009, and he started actually the first 2 games of the 2018 World Cup, but lost his starting position. Another of many forwards who they try out that didn't score much. He actually got 15 goals in his 66 caps over the year, which is under 25%. So never really kind of delivered on the goals. We saw Giancarlo Gonzalez as a kind of a rotating starter in the 2021 Gold Cup, but shortly after the Gold Cup, he disappeared from the squad. And he's 33 years old, so probably retired, but a real veteran too. Most of these guys have more than 60 caps. Giancarlo Gonzalez has 88. And finally, Alvaro Saborio, who retired from the squad a few times actually, but seemed to keep popping back up. He played his last game in 2021, actually, even though he's 40 years old now. And he earned 111 caps and 36 goals, so they do miss his goals. But even by the 2018 World Cup, he was fairly old and actually didn't play in that World Cup or in the 2014 Cup. So his main period was actually before that time. Nevertheless, he held on and actually was part of the squad for the 2019 Gold Cup. And finally, we end with Oscar Ramirez. He was the manager in the 2018 World Cup and was dismissed shortly after, I think. Yeah, he finished in 2018. So that manager is gone, and we have Luis Fernando Suarez as manager of the team. There were a couple of managers in between them, actually. Okay, so let's finish with the players that we predict to be starters. And Luis Fernando Suarez, well, they did fire a manager shortly before the Gold Cup, and he was brought in. But I don't think that's going to happen here, so we can expect him to be the manager leading them through it. A bit of debate after the 2021 Gold Cup as to whether Lionel Moreira would take the starting spot, because Keylor Navas kind of eschews the Gold Cup. But no, Keylor Navas came in immediately and was a starter and has been ever since. So again, their biggest name, it would be a surprise to see him not start. For defenders, we also have likely Aaron Cruz, but he'll be a backup, and Esteban Alvarado may be challenging Cruz for that third goalkeeper spot. We're pipping Cruz right now, but it'll likely be Moreira and Cruz as the backup keepers. Okay, for defense, we saw that Calvo and Duarte basically started World Cup qualifying, and then towards the end of that campaign, they experimented a bit and ultimately went back to Calvo and Duarte for the playoff game against New Zealand. And I think they'll do the same in the World Cup, go with the true and tried. And so Francisco Calvo and Oscar Duarte, probably the central defensive pairing. But they do have good backup with Kendall Waston and Juan Pablo Vargas, and have also brought some of the young defensive midfielders, Gallo and Chacon, as backup defenders, which they'll probably need, because as you see, there are only 4 candidates here. All the others seem to be off the squad, so they usually bring 5 or 6. So maybe those defensive midfielders will cover that position. For left backs, it looks like Brian Oviedo is going to be the starter. It looked like Ronald Matarrita was making a bid, but he looks like he'll be the backup here. Oviedo seemed to win out, as the veterans tended to do. Ian Lawrence is a possibility to bring to the cup, but if they do, he'll probably be on the bench. For right backs, again, the veteran seems to have won out, Keisha Fuller, but actually I'm not as certain with this one because the player challenging for his position, Carlos Martinez, did sub in for him in the second half of the playoff game against New Zealand. So I'm kind of thinking that maybe Carlos Martinez might get the bid. So right now I'm going to put them as rotating. That's kind of hedging my bet, I know. And possibly Blanco being brought to the cup, but hasn't been with the squad in the last part of this period, so maybe off the squad. Defensive midfielders, Daniel Chacon and Orlando Gallo. I think that they will be starters. No, maybe not. I think they're kind of close to starting, but I'm not confident enough to say so. I think they'll be definitely handy candidates to have because I think they can start in central defense or in central midfield, and especially against the attacking teams that they'll be facing. Maybe use. So I wouldn't be surprised if they gained a starting position during the cup. I'm going to highlight them in yellow. That's kind of my hedging of bets colors. But it is actually the central midfielder, Celso Borges and Yeltsin Tejada. If they follow their pattern of sticking with the veterans, these guys have never really been questioned. So I think they'll definitely be starters. Perhaps Chacon or Gallo coming in if they don't perform well or get injured or something like that. Left midfield. Well, Johan Venegas is coded as a left midfielder, but he kind of plays all over the place. So I think they will find a place for him regardless of the formation that they use. It could be attacking midfielder. He played even as a centre forward once. So they usually put him on the field. Gerson Torres is a left midfielder or coded as such, but he usually plays on the right, actually. And he looked like he was kind of starting to nail down that right attacking midfielder position. But that was when Joel Campbell was forced into service as a centre forward. So I think Gerson Torres will start as a backup. But if Joel Campbell has to play as a forward, I do see him getting a couple of starts as a right attacking midfielder. On the left wing, more so than Gerson Torres, Jewison Bennett is kind of nailing down that position. So I'm being a bit bold in nominating him as a starter, but I think it is, I think he will at least get a few starts because they really don't have a lot of options over there. They went through a lot of players, but he kind of ended up being the one who played the most. Right wing, Carlos Mora. Well, we have him likely to make the squad, but I wouldn't say he is a starter. Attacking midfielders, we have Brian Ruiz as definitely making the squad, but less and less has he been starting, sometimes as a central attacking midfielder, but I think they're going to use him as a substitute because at the age he's at, 37 years old? I don't think he will play full games there. So maybe in a couple of situations he could be a starter, but more likely as a substitute. Brandon Aguilera will probably be on the bench, may get a couple of starts. He's likely to make the final squad, but I wouldn't say likely to be a starter. Joel Campbell, definitely a starter. He's listed as a forward, but I think they would prefer him as a right attacking midfielder, sending in crosses and stuff. And I think they're going to start with Anthony Contreras as the forward, and hopefully he will get goals for them. If not, they may again press Joel Campbell into service as the starting forward. Likely candidate Jose Guillermo Ortiz should be recovered from his injury and should be with the squad, especially given how few forwards they actually have here. But he kind of had his chance as the starting forward and didn't produce. So I think he will be coming in as a substitute. And that is the end. I'm not sure whether we have the requisite number of players. We have a couple of perhapses there that I used yellow to highlight. But that's it, the run through the players and the starters. And that actually brings us to the end of this media cast. So thanks very much for listening. Keep in mind that we will do an update as new information comes out. So an update on teams and players probably in early to mid-November. We're going to do that after teams publish their final rosters. Meanwhile, keep an eye on us at Soccerphiles Canada. That's Soccerphiles with a PH in the middle and an S at the end. On our website is soccerphiles.captivate.fm. Hope to see you in our next episode, and bye-bye.